here are some news stories that were interesting, and I really think the most interesting one is in the Security Now podcast, which I thought I opened somewhere. Here it is, yeah. Now, the title is about BitLocker, but that's not the part that I found very interesting. He had an interesting discussion here. A reader called in, this is from Steve Gibson, who's a famous security guru, been doing this podcast for like 18 years. It's very much worth listening to. And a reader called in, and he said, I run a web service, and my users are complaining that it's too much bother to log in. And I wonder if I could just ditch the password and instead just ask for their email address and send them a code that they have to type in. And what Steve pointed out is that would be perfectly fine, and what would even be perfectly fine would be to not even send them a code, but just send them a link to click, which would include an encrypted code in there, because the point is everybody has you log in with a password, and then they have if you forget your password, we'll email you a way to reset the password. So if someone can get in your email, they can already get in your account. So the password is just a waste of time. The actual password you try to remember and update and put in your password manager does not make you any more secure than just collecting your email. And Microsoft seems to have figured this out. When I enter Office 365, it doesn't ask me for my password anymore. It just asks me for my email address, and then it emails me a code. If I have an app on my phone, it just pops up a box saying, is it you trying to log in? Click here. And so I think you could argue, and he does argue strongly, that the passwords are nothing more than a waste of time in security theater. It's a very interesting argument, and I think more and more people are catching on. So it's an interesting discussion, and that's the kind of good thoughts you get on that podcast. So here's the official NIST U.S. government recommendations to avoid ransomware, and they're pretty simple, but everybody keeps getting hit by ransomware, and so I thought it would be good to look at this. I was doing this for one of my consulting jobs. They wanted official U.S. government recommendations for various security things, and one of the ones I was interested in was ransomware. And here's what they say you should do. Incredibly obvious stuff. Use antivirus, put on your patches, use products that block access to known ransomware sites. These would be like OpenDNS and other products like Microsoft SmartScreen that block access to certain websites that you know to be malicious. This is probably the most important one. Use allow lists. The F-Secure antivirus product will do this by default, and there are other products that can turn it on, and the point is this would only let you run known good third-party software. Microsoft is increasingly doing this. In my projects where students download something and run it, Microsoft is increasingly popping up a box saying, this looks suspicious, maybe you shouldn't run it, which is the right thing to do. It should just have a list of all the known good commercial software, which is not an infinite list, and just anything that doesn't look like it's a known good product, it should either refuse to run it or make it difficult to run it, and that would seem very valuable. All right, anyway, so pretty good ideas, very simple stuff. So this TruthSpy is a stalkerware app. Now, stalkerware is big business. They sell it as parents monitoring their children, but people use it to spy on ex-lovers as probably the most abusive common use. When somebody breaks up with you, you put stalkerware on their phone, then you find out who the new boyfriend is and go beat him up or something. And this is a really common problem. And but it turns out in this case, this TruthSpy group made a whole bunch of consumer-grade spyware software products, and all of them had a serious vulnerability, which is this one here, which is, as I mentioned before, the number one vulnerability of apps is not in the app, it's on the server. They have an unprotected API on the server storing the data, so anybody can just access the data. And they notified them a year ago and they failed to patch it, so it's quite in line with my experiences. Usually people that make poorly designed apps are absolutely asleep and don't respond to vulnerability reports and just leave it broken. Until you manage to get it in the press and well enough known. I found one just about like this I told you about earlier, and it took maybe 3 or 4 years before the humiliation motivated them to actually change it. I see a comment in the chat. What situation not to use password in BitLocker podcast? Essentially never. Many people are just abandoning passwords. By the way, there's another thing discussed in there. More websites are blocking part of the page. You can't read anything until you give them your email address. Now, I didn't do it because I thought you'd have to make an account, but all they want is your email address, and then they'll send you spam in order to make money. So all you have to do is make a throwaway email address and put it in. But the point is, all people need is your email address, then they'll email you something, and you have to open that to get to the page. And that amounts to proving that you know who you are, and you really don't need a password. It amounts to the same thing. So I think just simple logic, thinking it through, the logic of having passwords is not clear. So this is a mass. Now, I don't know why this happened, but people apparently in Afghanistan made a Mastodon server, and they chose the domain QueerAF. So apparently it's an LGBTQ community in Afghanistan, which has got to be pretty brutal. So of course the Taliban seized the domain, and now they're trying to move to another host. And what they say is just add this line to your hosts file. The problem is, I didn't know this, Mastodon has a known flaw. It ignores the hosts file. It does not resolve DNS the usual way, apparently. So that's annoying. Anyway, a little bit interesting there. So there was ransomware earlier this week. This ransomware decoder was published. They said, we found a flaw in the encrypting system, and you can freely decrypt your stuff, and now everybody's yelling at them. I didn't know this, but apparently it is an industry practice that when there is a defect in ransomware, you find it secretly, and you secretly in back channels communicate to, I guess, the consultants or big companies. I'm not sure how this gets around, somehow in some private community. And they say they've been doing it for 9 months, they've been decrypting it, but you don't publish it publicly because then, of course, they'll update the ransomware. So this is a pretty common thing in security, that there's the information that goes through back channels and you don't want to publicly disclose it until the right time. It's operational security. Microsoft got in trouble when they started taking down botnets. With this, maybe when they first started, maybe 8 years ago, taking down botnets, they would take them down, and then they would find out that those botnets had already been taken over by another research company, and they were undoing someone else's work. It's a problem. You need to have efficient back channels of communication for the good guys to work together without leaking to the bad guys. The police have similar problems, of course. So this is a report from OpenAI. This has been getting a lot of press, and I think it's all a tempest in a teapot. OpenAI and Microsoft both today announced this, that they have found state-affiliated threat actors using AI. And so they claim they figured out what they did was they found people who made accounts, OpenAI accounts, and then they didn't like their queries. And so what they did was they researched various companies and cybersecurity tools, debug code and generate scripts and so on, generate content for phishing campaigns, translate technical papers, assist with coding. It just seems to me like these people just did the usual stuff that anybody does on OpenAI. You go to ChatGPT and you ask it to explain you technical things and translate things and things like that. So it's not at all surprising. It seems to me like the threat actors are just using it the way everybody else is, to help them write their code, to help them research companies and such. And I don't see why people are getting very excited or surprised by this. I also don't know what deactivating their account is going to do. They can just make another account. Anyway, so GAO, the Government Accountability Office, had a breach, and it's an interesting situation here in Viewpoint Incident Response to see what happens. So this is not part of the government, it's an independent, or at least nonpartisan group. And so they had a breach, but it wasn't at the GAO, it was at a contractor. They have a contractor, CGI Federal, that does some work for them, and the contractor notified them on January 17, which is like a month ago, of a data breach. However, it turns out that the data breach came through Atlassian, and the Atlassian vulnerability was known in October. And the CISA told everybody that this was very dangerous and you had to update your Atlassian. So what happened between October and January in that 3-month period, and they're not getting any answers from the consulting group about why there was a warning, and there's 3 months. Either they didn't patch the thing for 3 months, or they got hacked 3 months ago and didn't tell anybody for 3 months or something. And this is extremely common. that when people get hacked and they don't really know what to do, and they argue and they don't really want to tell anybody, and people get mad that you're late. Let's see, I think I saw another comment in the Twitch. Not sure why OpenAI complains if OpenAI is open to anyone. That's right. Well, OpenAI discovered that there were some things going, they checked for abuse of their service. Everybody does. So you see if, like a lot of people are blocking them making images of Biden or Trump now for political content, and they try to see if they're using it to make poisons or bombs or anything. So apparently they detected people trying to write ransomware with it. And I can understand how they would terminate your account for that, but it doesn't seem to indicate something significant about ransomware groups. So what did you think they were doing? They're just using AI tools like everybody is. Anyway, let me stop the news.